Hello everyone and welcome back to another album review, and in this video I'm going to review Skin by Horror. At this point I've already talked about many of the releases of Horror. For me they started as a pretty promising group with some of their first releases fusing nicely elements of industrial and hip hop and metal and even hardcore punk in some occasions. As the years would go by and they release more stuff, they would end up experimenting with more and different sounds altogether. And even if I do admire the fact that the band is constantly going for new directions and new sounds, the results, especially with more recent releases, have been really hit or miss. When it comes to Skin, I think that we get a full-length album that lands somewhere towards the middle. In some aspects I think that we get some of the most interesting material Horror have ever written, but as a whole I'm pretty mixed on this one. This album is a big mess, there's a lot going on to it, and the thing is that this is an album that basically fuses all of the sounds that Horror have put together over the years, and it's all just packed up in this fairly short, just 33-minute long album. On one hand, I like that there is so much going on to this album. I like albums that have variety and experiment with many different genres, and trust me, there's like a lot going on with this album. The thing is that even if it might feel sort of beneficial, it also works as its worst enemy. It is a really inconsistent album, but I would say that what hurts about this album the most is that towards the songs we get so many transitions that make absolutely no sense. There are many occasions over here where you would have tracks that just go from one genre to the next, but the way it transitions from one person to the next, it's just so abrupt, it is so disconnected, it makes absolutely no sense. And you just have a bunch of tracks over here that just feel weirdly structured and paced. It's just a bunch of ideas being thrown through the wall and see what sticks best. But the thing is that most of those ideas just happen to be really short, and once you feel that it's going somewhere, then it just abruptly transitions into a portion that just feels disconnected, and unfortunately this happens with a big portion of this album. There are though moments where you get just main ideas that get fleshed out into the entirety of the songs, and this at times it works at its best, at others at its worst. Now let's get into the track listing and say that the very first track, NUGE SNIGHT, is actually one of the most intriguing moments over here. I think that this works pretty well as an introduction, as it's this really intense piece of industrial music that starts with these really cool harsh noise portions, and towards the end you even get some furious grindcore segments. Yeah, with just this really short song we get a lot out of this, and it doesn't take long to see that this album is all over the place. One of the most notable moments towards the beginning has to be the third track, Bite My Face, that also features Corey Taylor, and it starts as a pretty sort of average industrial metal piece with alternative metal elements as well, but then out of nowhere you get this transition into this sort of smooth trap portion that really doesn't make any sense. It doesn't connect with what the track does previously, and then towards the end we get a heavy breakdown portion which sounds nice, but again not really seeing what this has to do with what the song was doing previously. The track Slow Bread featuring Band B might be the longest moment of the album over here, but it's a track that doesn't really have change-ups to it or going into different directions. This is actually one of the most straightforward tracks out of this album, but in my opinion it's also one of my least favorite moments. The thing is that this particular idea that they had with this song is one of the most underwhelming things I've heard out of Horror. It is a kinda smooth hip hop track that is pretty one-dimensional, and it has a really obnoxious chorus that gets repeated so many times over and over again. It gets boring, it gets a bit annoying, the verses are not really that great in their delivery, and it's just a song that in my opinion it was kinda poorly made. Protect My Bitch Part 2 is one of the most intense moments over here. I like the industrial and noisy elements out of it, but I think that this had more leaning towards it. At the end of the day it feels like a sort of underwhelming idea. The track Speak of the Devil in my opinion is actually one of the best things Horror have ever done. I really ended up liking the direction of this track, and it was kinda unexpected as well. This one feels sort of like a throwback sound to like alternative metal of the 2000s. I ended up liking the clean vocals out of this one, and the melodies were also kinda solid, fused with those metal and industrial elements. It is a nicely produced track, definitely one of the best sounding in the album, and it caught me off guard. It might be on the shorter side of things, but this is certainly one of the most successful experimentations out of the band in my opinion. But then right after this we get the track Skinhead featuring Saul Williams, which this has to be the biggest mess out of this entire album. Like, this track sucks. This is not well executed at all in my opinion. It starts kinda nice with the hardcore punk elements, which is something that we see from horror from time to time, but this segment is short-lived and then it just gets all over the place. From a sort of soothing hip-hop segment that doesn't really sound that good, with a weird sample attached to it, which then leads to a sort of breakdown portion, and then towards the second half we get this sort of a cappella spoken word in a rapping style, and this portion drags for so long. And yeah, I think that this track is simply just a mess. I didn't like this. The pacing and the structure is really off for me. Lower Than Scum is possibly the most hard-hitting and the most intense moment out of this album. It is an extremely short track, but it's this really insane fusion of like grindcore, which then leads to some industrial and hardcore punk elements. This track, I mean, it's not something all that amazing, but I like how intense it is. Devil at the Crossroads is one of the few moments over here where we get a fully fleshed out song that doesn't really go all over the place, but it's also one of the best moments over here. I particularly like the idea behind this track and the way it was executed. I think that it's one of the best tracks in terms of production and sound choices. I think that it sounds pretty interesting as it has this kind of nice balance between intense and smooth, and even if it has a transition towards the end, this one actually makes sense with what the track was doing previously, as it sort of follows the same melody but with a different tempo and a different style, being much more aggressive and harsh in a more noisy industrial style, which in my opinion sounded really good, and I like that it made sense, that it wasn't out of nowhere. So for me, definitely one of the strongest moments out of the album. With the final 3 tracks, I feel that we get some kind of blunt approaches, especially when it comes to the trap sections. Once again, we get moments with kind of awkward transitions. We might get a few parts that sound interesting, but I don't think that it offers some of its greatest elements, like also especially when it comes to the track limits. What's with the mixing of this one? This track really doesn't sound good. So this to me leads to an album that, like I said, it feels kind of a mixed bag. In my opinion, in some occasions we get some pretty solid stuff out of this album, but also we have other moments that I didn't really like at all. This could have been so much better in my opinion. It's nice to see the variety and how much it has to offer, but it's extremely inconsistent. Not everything over here works that well. In my opinion, horror can honestly do better than just that. I'm gonna give Skin a 6- out of 10. What's your opinion on this album? Like it, dislike it, why, and what do you want to review next time? Let me know down in the comments. Leave a like if you enjoyed the video, subscribe for more content like this. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video. Goodbye.